What I'd like to do is I'm going to come around and do my Price is Right impression with the microphone. If you kind of have a question, put your hand up. I'll get to you, and then we'll ask the question. I will rip the microphone out of your hand and go to the next person while they're answering your question. We talked about. I'll start us off here with a question for Kent. Where did you get your suit? Okay, who has the next? While he's answering that question, who has? Okay, I'm going to run around this way. So Kent, you answer that question. No, you have to answer it.
It's Sam's Tailor in Hong Kong.
This question is actually for Kent also. In your presentation earlier, you said that we can't call them management companies anymore, but you didn't tell us what the proper new term is.
Well, you're open to be creative. I've just told you what you can't call it. The word service is appearing a lot, but that seems kind of weak. So I think it's an opportunity for you to, create something else that everybody else copies.
Robert, question for you. In front of a business aviation audience, NTSB, what are the hot topics that we need to consider from your point of view in the business aviation industry?
That is a great question, and I really do. Hal and I were talking about this earlier. I don't think that the FARs they're the floor. And do your customers are they satisfied with being there operating at that floor level? And I think we all realize, no, they deserve better than that. So I do believe in things like Argus audits and ISBAO registration and things like that. I think that's all important. Joining the Air Charter Safety Foundation and participating and doing above and beyond just what you're required to do. And that's what we would like to see. We coming out of that NASCAR-related accident, we did recommend that companies, Part 91 operators, do SMS, incorporate SMS into everything that they're doing. So that's probably it in a nutshell.
You talked about audits, so I'll go to our left, your right, to Joe. When you audit, and we are at Reynolds Jet, a platinum operator, but when you audit operators, what are the things that most often come up in those audits?
Oh, that's easy. The lack of a safety management system. That's probably the number one reason to bust an audit. It's many times the flight department manager, and this is very similar to what Robert was saying before. We ask them, let's go through your safety management system, and their safety management system consists of some dusty binders on a shelf and a whiteboard or a bulletin board where they stuck a few articles or something, and that's it as far as their safety management system. So that's the number one thing that we see most often.
Hey, Al, if I could just add a little comment there. The presentations have all been great, by the way. It's nice to reflect on too many decades around airplanes. When I became a Navy officer, I showed up in a fighter squadron flying F-4s, and we had the best record flying around ships in the Pacific Fleet, and we thought we were good. And you know what? We got lazy. 10 months later, we'd had 3 major aircraft accidents, 6 ejections, 2 fatalities, and the worst FOD record in the Pacific Fleet. So it's about continuous improvement and always challenging yourself and never thinking I've completed the safety journey, because you never will. So SMS is a topic very near and dear to my heart. And I went through that in the airlines. We're starting to see it more and more in other segments of aviation. And sometimes I say what gives SMS a bad name is the first S. People hear safety and immediately tune it out. It's really a management system, and that's the way your companies should look at it. Being able to manage risk, identify risk, be very process-driven is the way you want to run your companies. We're trying to apply some of those principles to a safety environment. So I'm very passionate about it. Our regulator needs to be on this journey with us. Our companies need to be on it. I guarantee you that the folks that are running your companies are very interested in process and risk mitigation. Let's apply that to how we're flying airplanes, and we're starting to make a lot of progress in that regard.
Thanks. Nobody asked me, but I'll chime in there. Tom said that he thinks the SMS, the wrong word is safety. I think the wrong word is system, because I didn't invent that myself. Don Arndt and I were having a conversation. Don Arndt, of course, is one of the FAA guys on SMS, and he says, people say, "Oh, safety management system. Yeah, I want to have that." We don't want them to have it. We want them to do it. We want them to actively manage safety. So Don's contention is the word system is the bad word, because you want them to do it and not have it. There's some wisdom to that. You think about that. People manage things that are important to them. Finances are important to organizations. So what do? They go out and they hire a chief financial officer. They conduct audits. They make sure they're complying with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act or whatever it is that they audit in accordance with generally accepted accounting practices. They do those things because finances are important. So if safety is important, why aren't we going out and managing safety in the same way that we manage other things that are important to us?
Kent, okay, I'll come to Mercer in a second. But Kent, what is the number one question that you were asked from a structure viewpoint? I thought your presentation was excellent. But what is the one thread that you deal with over and over and over again?
Number one question I get usually in the hallway, parking lot, not when I'm standing in front of everybody, is about personal use. Every company wants to maintain the notion that they're not doing it. I thought that was interesting in your accident summary that came up. Personal use is always going to be an aspect of the use of these aircraft, because the executives that we're dealing with live their whole life the way they do business, and they do business across their whole life. So pretending that it doesn't exist and that it should only be talked about in the hallway and the parking lot is silly. And it causes a lot of insurance, SEC, tax, and even safety consequences, because I think crews have a different attitude about safety when it's not a business flight. And they should view all flights as business in the sense of professional. My thoughts.
My question is really for everyone. Well, I have two questions, and I'm going to ask them both and then let Al take the microphone. So my first question is really maybe Kent primarily. So I understand the FET and, of course, is a 135 operator. Under 91, we all know the IRS was threatening to enforce it on management fees and Lord knows what else. Are we over that hurdle? And Tom, I'm sure you.
No, there's a lot of audits that are in suspense right now, which is an almost made-up word within the IRS. They don't have a procedure for putting a halt to these audits. We're now even seeing audits starting up again on this issue of applying FET to management fee. One of the interesting things about what's going on is the IRS hasn't educated anyone in the field of the law change in 2012. And they've retracted most of their guidance in this area. And so you've got these auditors just sent out like cowboys to with very little instruction of what they're supposed to be doing. So the audits are really scary right now.
I could maybe add a kind of a Washington view of that. Kent's got we're in the the field view, which I don't have. So it's been a real challenge for our industry. We are working both with the Treasury and the IRS. We've seen some very encouraging signs lately. We spent a lot of time educating IRS and Treasury about how our industry operates. Initially, we talked to them about Part 91 and Part 135 and the way we talked about operational control. And the answer we received was, we're not bound by how another agency in the government regulates you. So we knew that we had a pretty heavy lift to get out there and try to, and they're good people. Nobody's evil here. We just have a disagreement on a policy issue. So we spent a lot of time educating him. And about 6 months ago, we started getting a lot more questions from both IRS and Treasury. So the Chief Counsel's advice came out in March of 2012. In June of last year, they suspended the assessments. They're still auditing, but they're not saying pay up. Some folks had, spent a lot of money fighting this prior to that. So, the audits are going on from everything we can see in Washington. But recently, the IRS has asked us some pretty good questions. Can you put us in contact with attorneys at the FAA that can more clearly talk to us about Part 91 versus Part 135? That's a good sign. They've asked us about what a typical management agreement looks like, which is very positive. They've also asked about record keeping. How does an operator keep track of whether or not they're operating under Part 91 and 135? Now, the IRS put this issue on what's called their priority guidance list. In the FAA, we call this proposed rulemaking. The IRS calls it proposed guidance. So they've told us that they are going to rule on this month. So what they'll do in the rulemaking process, so it's the same as with the FAA, they're subject to the Administrative Procedures Act, when it's open for public comment. We'll have an opportunity to comment. They're going to put out their view of the world this month. And we'll have a period of time when we can comment, we can continue to lobby, clarify questions they ask in their proposed guidance, and hopefully move this in a proper direction. I'll say that the relationship has gone from non-existent to very constructive. We brought on a consultant that had recently left the IRS, a very accomplished tax attorney, Jorge Castro, is giving us good advice. We've got a lot of NATA members that are giving us good advice as well. We've flown in small operators. Marion Epps, many of you know Marion. She's about a 5'1" fireball that really knows how to run an aviation business. And Marion, he went and told him, hey, you're going to put us out of business if you go down this path. That was all very helpful. So we've tried to take a long view, be solution-oriented. It's a very complex subject that I had absolutely no knowledge of before I walked in the door at NATA, and I think it's been very constructive lately.
Thank you. Question for Joe. We saw a lot of data on where you see growth internationally. Nationally, where do you see that growth and why?
Well, there's a couple areas in the air charter side of our industry that's becoming very interesting and I think is sort of the direction that the air charter business is heading. The airlines have done a great job of having these code-sharing partners, like the Sky Teams, the One Skies, and so forth, where the airlines are really using each other's airplanes to complete the mission. There's a lot of talk now in the air charter side of the business of let me back up a little bit. One of the big problems that air charter has right now is the low utilization and the amount of deadhead that these charter aircraft are now flying. It's somewhere between 30 and 40% of the flight hours are flying empty. So the industry as a whole has got to figure out how to get that utilization up. So we're starting to see a lot of talk, a lot of interest in charter operators joining forces to use each other's airplanes. And not a handshake kind of deal, like, okay, I'll use your airplane, you use mine to cover trips. A real true code sharing type of arrangement where they see each other's schedules, they can actually book the trip, just so we can start getting the utilization up higher. It's got to get up in that, at least up into that 75% range, and then the operators can start making some more money. And one of the things that we're also seeing, and this is really a question for Kent, we're talking to a lot of Part 91 flight departments that are considering just putting their airplanes on a charter certificate and running all their trips under a Part 135 for a lot of reasons, but primarily it just makes it a real clean, real clean deal as far as if it's a personal trip, you just pay the charter rate. I don't know if that's what you're seeing or not. But
Joe, you're encouraging them to join NATA when they're talking about becoming a 135, I hope.
Right.
Well, Kent, answer that again. I know it was part of your presentation, but if I'm going to go away, or Mercer, my boss, is talking to a potential airplane owner or management client, and we have that elevator 2 minutes, what are those 2 or 3 points that we have to get across?
The number one is an airplane that's 135, you can charge whatever to whomever, and only the air carrier is operating the plane, meaning liability protection for the high net worth individual, the family of companies, all of these other people that are behind buying the aircraft. It's funny to hear this from Joe, because I thought maybe I was seeing that anecdotally, and it wasn't a pattern. After 9/11, we had a lot of clients go to all 135 out of a new and kind of paranoid fear about liability. Now I'm seeing it because of the desire to not only have the liability protection, but to charge whatever to whomever and not have to understand all of these 91 limitations.
Robert, one for you. As operators, we tend to get, I think, caught up in just what we do, flying the airplane. But in your experience on the boards, are there correlations out there that we are missing as operators that could improve safety? And what I mean by that is, are we paying enough attention to the infrastructure in which we operate it? Airports, those kind of things. Is there evidence of that?
When you say we, do you mean we as society, we as an aviation community, or we as pilots? Who exactly do you mean?
Yeah, we as pilots, we as aircraft operators. Are we paying as much attention as we should to those elements that are around us when it comes to fuel providers, the FBOs, etc.?
I really don't know. I can't answer that one way or the other. Just don't know.
You just blew my filling question time. And I was going to then pass it over to Tom because of the new ISBA.
Well, in terms of infrastructure of our businesses, it's changing rapidly. Everybody knows about the FBO consolidation going on. Private equity is playing. It will only accelerate from here because money's still cheap and folks are interested in investing. So you're going to see continued consolidation within the FBO industry. You're seeing that in some other segments as well. The fuel industry is very interesting right now. You've got big players out there, but as you've got some very large fractional and charter operators that are starting to drive how fuel is sold at different locations around the U.S. So I'd say from a business perspective, it behooves all of us to be very agile and not stuck in a particular way of thinking because the business model is changing rapidly. And all of us have to learn how to deal with that. That's not necessarily bad. I think it's brought on a lot of health to the industry that's been struggling. I've talked to our business owners. I've talked to them frequently. It seemed like we'd have a March or April bump. Everybody get a little excited, and things head this way. Something changed this year. Businesses are doing a little better than they have. Everyone's afraid to say we're over the hump because there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. But a lot of the businesses at airports are starting to kind of say maybe this is sustainable now, and that's a good thing for our industry.
A question for Tom about over here. Because of that consolidation, we're seeing more and more sole source locations for fuel, and we're starting to see some unreasonable fuel prices out there. Do you think there's going to be an effort, intervention from the government perhaps, to control some of those pricing at sole source locations?
No, I think the market will intervene eventually. It depends on whether or not you're based at that airport, whether you're going to be subject to those fuel prices, right? And I know it's already very, expensive to operate. It's a double-edged sword. So what we say is, yes, there may be a monopoly situation there. Few people pay full retail, depending on what sort of business you're operating. On the other hand, you're competing with surrounding airports to a large degree, right? That doesn't do you much good if you're hanging your airplane at a place that's got one FBO. One of the things I fear is folks see these prices, and perhaps that is an airport authority that says, I want a piece of the action. Let me go in there and start my own fuel supply business, and I can drop that price by $1, and the county airport commission gets a bunch of new revenue. That's a tough issue. I mean, we've seen that around the country. And I understand that, the states and the cities have struggled with revenue just like businesses have in the Great Recession. But it's, we're cautioning against the intervention of the public sector into private enterprise because we think that private enterprise is always going to be more efficient, be more innovative, be more strategic in how they run a business. So I've done a terrible job of answering your question, but things are changing. And, we generally... what I tell people is that our members can compete with anyone as long as we have a level playing field. So let's make sure that if a government's going to come in and run an FBO, that they have to meet the same capital requirements and lease requirements that anybody else on that airfield does. So it's an interesting dynamic right now in the FBO world in that regard.
I'm making my way around the back here, but one question for Joe. We sat at the back during your presentation, and Dennis Fox from EJM and I said that we were going to go to China and start a airplane interior cleaning business. So what do you see domestically, following up from Mercer's question, what do you see domestically that we can improve based on your experience auditing operators and outfits overseas? What are some of the things that maybe we can learn from those folks?
That's a hard question. The U.S. business aviation industry is really the world leader. I mean, everybody looks at us for guidance of how to run their operations. Everybody around the world looks at the U.S. marketplace. I guess if they're going back to what I said earlier. I guess we just need to be much more efficient. If you look at what the cost of operating these airplanes are, we've got to figure out a way to make it get the utilization up. Either get the utilization up or get the price up. And I'm talking about the charter industry. And the price is we're pretty high right now. I mean, so I don't know how much more we can continue to raise prices, but we've got to become a lot more efficient in the way that we operate these aircraft.
Say efficient, you mean repositioning?
Everything, repositioning, the ways that the airplanes are maintained. We have some customers that are large MROs that emit that some of these maintenance procedures on some of these business aircraft are a little antiquated. And I'm just going to say this, but maybe in some cases we're over maintaining some of these airplanes as far as some of these phase inspections. No, as far as some of these. And when I say that is, when you, I'll give you a perfect example. We're very close to the folks out at Duncan Aviation, which is one of the best, I think, one of the best MROs in the industry. And for them to do a phase inspection on a certain type of airplane where they have to totally remove the interior, pull up all the floorboards, and they're saying, well, there's got to be an easier way to do this. Maybe there's a way that we can insert, build in cameras or something, so we could, instead of tearing the airplane apart to make sure there's not a little tiny bit of corrosion on that one spar, maybe there's an easier way to do that, and in turn would have a big impact on the cost of operating these airplanes. So they're looking at figuring out some way to put tiny little cameras in the fuselage, so they could just hook up a laptop and see if there's any corrosion rather than taking the whole airplane apart and trying to put it back together again.
Probably one of the more mature pilots as I looked at some of the 12-year-olds that were in here flying the different jets. But first thing I'd like to say is thank you to guys for coming out and doing the presentations. I've been around. This was a day well spent, hearing from you guys. And it's I've only been back in the corporate side for about 8 years. Going on the proactive versus reactive side, I used to be on a go team for an airline and dealt with safety. We started to lose hangar flying, which to me was very valuable. You'd show up the first day of classes or hang around, and pilots would talk about, here's problems I encountered, here's something I encountered, here's an airport that had problems, here's an operation. The airlines got away from the hangar flying and got into the computer home study, but we had FOQA, we had ASAP, we had audits, so we would get trends and we could regulate the training of the airline based on those. So we didn't get the hangar flying, lost that, but at least we could do something with our training to deal with a proactive thing. Last 2 years I've been doing recurrence where they now are doing the same thing where you've gone to the home study. The hangar flying's gone. They send you a code word, you sign into the computer, do all the systems, take the tests, show up, take a test, go to the simulator, you're there 2 days and you're gone. Each one of you has a specialty. Where do I go as an operator if I want to pass along the information to the other 10 pilots in my group? Where can I go to get information on the trends prior to the accidents? We see the accidents and the result of that. Where do I go to get the information prior to that I can put out to my people?
Well, as far as there's obviously a lot of information available, online and so forth. But then that gets back to your first comment about sitting in front of a computer. That's a very good question. I don't have a good answer for you.
It's changing. I have, my youngest son is 17, and he's the one I go to for all IT issues, including the video you saw. So, hangar flying is still happening, and it always will. It's happening with these stupid electronic devices instead of in person. And so the associations have a variety of web portals and chat rooms and where this is still going on. Almost every make and model aircraft has, especially in the corporate community, a devoted group of corporate pilots who share information across companies. It's funny that I know about this because I hear about this as a lawyer from other lawyers who hate it. Lawyers are terrified of all the silliness that takes place on Twitter and email, and some of it I look at and say, yeah, we both know within hangar flying there's a lot of stupidity that gets said. Now it's being captured electronically, but there's a lot of value that takes place too. And in the SMS world, I've been involved in a lot of discussions of how long do we keep records, and there's a big push to bring that number down as low as possible. And what do you lose? you lose the long cycle trends. You won't see that, geez, every time we replace a chief pilot, safety gets really confusing for a little while until it stabilizes. You know. So I see both ends of this hangar flying electronic communication world. It's a mess right now. But I don't think you can kill it if you want to.
I see a dichotomy that, I've thought that ever since 9/11, well, certainly has been until recently the worst financial times for the airline industry, probably ever. And so I worried, well, wow, safety's really going to suffer. There were so many of us, yourself included, me, others. How many people worked for an airline that voluntarily left? Raise your hand. Yeah, exactly. You didn't see that before 9/11, and I worried, and Tom, you left early too. You just looked like you retired. No. No, I'm just kidding. I only said that because he was a Delta chief pilot, but had to give him a hard time. But, okay, so what's been odd to me, the dichotomy is that in the worst economic times in the airline industry, yet the last passenger fatality on board a U.S. major scheduled carrier was right after 9/11. Unprecedented period of safety. How has that happened? So I don't understand it. Now, more to your question, I think we do lose something, but on the other hand, I'd like to think that through the safety programs, the folk with the ASAP, the ASIAS programs, LOSA, all of those programs, that we are gaining things to be able to correct the system instead of just one or two or three or four pilots at a time through the hangar flying. I really don't know the answer to what you're saying, to what you're asking, but I would like to think that these programs that I just mentioned are helping to correct the system and disseminate information when systemic flaws are identified, but I really don't know the answer to what you're saying. Personally, as a pilot, I still consider myself a pilot, even though I don't fly, but I would not like the idea of having to sit at home and study and then show up. I wouldn't like that at all.
It's been a transition for me. I guess I was looking for a shortcut from Joe, or saying somewhere there's a summary of all your audits that I can go to that one link. I can go to Kent and look at the legal thing and say, here's where the certificate actions are, here's the question. Because the thing on exchanging time was interesting because, like I said, we were just getting involved, just getting ready to get involved in doing that exact thing, not knowing what tax round.
Well, we do a summary every year of our audit findings, and it changes a little bit year to year. Like I mentioned before, safety management systems or lack of a safety management system is usually the number one issue. But yeah, we do that summary every year.
I think people feel that need, Ray, and I think they're responding to it kind of in an ad hoc basis. There's the Bonanza Society. I'm just finished the pre-buy on the first airplane I'm buying in my life, and I read MMOPA every post that goes on the web board. There was a PA-46 accident last weekend north of Denver, and there was an immediate post by a guy that was in the pattern and saw the whole thing happen. So, I think people have that need to exchange and kind of hear other views, and it's just not formalized the way, we were used to when we were younger.
I knew where to go with the NTSB, and I get AOPA, so I could see some of the layer planes, but the corporate area just seems a little a cloud somewhere.
I think this is a question for Robert, but maybe everybody on the panel has some perspective. There's been a SMS pilot program at the FAA for the last several years. I've been hearing rumors that the status of that program is going to change January 1st. Does anybody know anything about that?
And I couldn't hear an FAA, what type of program?
The SMS pilot program.
I don't know. We've been hearing that it's going to be mandated for 121 for a long time, and that hasn't happened, so I really don't know.
Let's stick with you, Robert. What's your opinion of this statement, that as a skill, monitoring has decreased, pilot monitoring, in our reliance of these very high-tech push-button airplanes?
Great question, and that is my favorite topic, that and safety culture, and I think you set me up for that one.
Yes, I did.
Just finished my master's thesis at Embry-Riddle actually passed, believe it or not. But I did it on the effect of or why pilots aren't good at monitoring the flight path. And, can we say that monitoring errors have increased over the last few years? I can't unequivocally say that, but we do have plenty of situations where pilots were not monitoring the aircraft adequately. Asiana was, the board voted on the Asiana crash in the end of June, and we certainly found that they, for whatever reason, they weren't monitoring the airspeed. UPS will deliberate on Tuesday. I can tell you that when we had our public hearing on that, we focused heavily on monitoring. They blew through the decision altitude and didn't realize that and crashed into the trees. There have been a lot of accidents that the board has investigated over the last 10 years and over the last 20 years that have involved lack of monitoring. Whether it's related to automation, I have a feeling it is, because when you had to fly the airplane, you were mentally engaged in it. Now we can, as we all know, we can become passive, and it's like a dog watching TV. You're just sitting there staring at something, but you're not processing it. So it's a topic that we're all very interested in, and we think that we can actually train monitoring. It's a skill that can be trained, it can be taught, it can be learned, and that's what we don't quite know how to do, is teach that skill.
Okay, this is for everybody. Over the next 10 years, what is the number one thing domestically here in the United States for business aviation? What's the number one invention? What's the number one technology? What is the number one thing that will totally revolutionize, in your opinion, business aviation in the next decade?
Well, I'll start. I think the rebuilding of our air traffic control system into a more of a satellite-based ADS-B type of system, where it's more of a free flight, direct, save a lot of money for the industry.
It's a great question, because I was thinking for a while, because there's a lot of things going on out there, Al. I worry about people being interested in aviation in general, not just pilots, but everybody. And, the FAA, as I said this morning, has done a fabulous job of helping us create a tremendously safe and stable system. And what comes with that is a very conservative view of new technology. And so right now, the FAA's ability to regulate new technology is very limited. The technology is going much faster than the FAA's ability to certify it and put it on certified aircraft. And so young people that go out to an airport, if they're going to look at a 1968 Cessna 150 and see all these steam gauges, they're going to go, I'll go do something else. We got to get this new technology in our airplanes in a very efficient manner to get people excited the way we were. When I was on my way to McDonald's in Hamilton, Ohio to flip burgers, I'd stop at the airport and just go listen and watch airplanes. We need folks to do that again. It's become so prohibitively expensive and intimidating for young people to get involved in aviation. Now, the folks that got to have it are going to figure a way out, but we got to get the people that are on the margins that may or may not have that passion involved in aviation, because they're the future. So I worry about the next 2 generations from now, where we're going to find the people that are working on our airplanes, that are flying our airplanes, that are manning control towers, that are handling our airplanes on the ground. We all got infected with it. I don't know how it happened, but the technology was pretty exciting when I was a young guy, and I'm not sure it's that exciting for a lot of people out there trying to learn how to fly.
Thank you. I don't really think I have a lot to add to that, and so I'm going to pass it to Ken.
Well, I guess the only bright spot is that my 17-year-old passed his sport pilot check ride Monday. So, and maybe Tom's onto something, because it wasn't a Skycatcher with the G3X panel, and because he's the Xbox generation, my only difficulty in teaching him was to get him to use the window instead of the instruments.
Okay, hold on a second. I'll keep my question.
I just wanted to add to that and say the integration of unmanned aerial vehicles into the airspace system And if any of you have any thoughts on what that's going to look like, I'd love to hear it.
They're coming. It's been very confusing in Washington because the FAA has been asked to regulate this, and oh, by the way, regulate the privacy aspects of an unmanned vehicle showing up outside your bathroom window. And the FAA said, no mas, we can't do that. So they're coming. And you know what? It's not all bad. There's some fabulous things we can do. If you're in agriculture, if you're in surveying, it's really going to revolutionize a lot of aspects of our economy. But we've got to figure out how to integrate it. We're participating in a lot of discussions in Washington on that. The phrase is sense and avoid. One of the most powerful associations in Washington is the Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Association, AUVSI. And, the technology's there. We've got to figure out how to integrate it. But it's not going to be easy. The military had a very challenging time with it. There are a lot of mid-air collisions that just didn't make the news in Iraq and Afghanistan because the Army UAV operators weren't talking to the Navy UAV operators, weren't talking to the Air Force operators. And we've got to get this right. I think the FAA's approach is good. They've got these 6 test sites for how to integrate unmanned aerial systems into the NAS. And hopefully we're going to learn some good lessons there. But like I said, they're coming. And you've probably seen them around here. Folks maybe flying them around the riverfront here. It's legal as long as you don't charge money for it, right? So.
Yeah, I was asked to write an article about that last week. And it's accelerated so much in the past year, it's mind-blowing. You can get, for less than $1,000, an excellent high-def video camera and helicopter that weighs less than 3 pounds. And when Congress, dictated, here's the regs we want to see, FAA, they thought a small unmanned vehicle was 55 pounds. I've humbly submitted to a number of people, let's just set the weight limit at that of an unladen African swallow. Anything below that, we're not going to regulate. Thank you, Monty Python fans. How do you regulate something that weighs less than a bird and is so cheap to acquire? I watched a TV crew just the other weekend filming an event using one of these over water. They got shots they couldn't have otherwise gotten. It wouldn't have been safe for a helicopter to be in this position over a marina that they were using it for. And I didn't see anybody complaining,
There's an aircraft modeling association who's been around forever, and they're terrified that suddenly their turf is going to be impacted by these unmanned aerial systems, and they're right. They are going to be impacted. So
I was going to bring my...
There's an association for everything, even an association for associations.
I was going to bring my quadcopter and fly it around here, and then I thought, if I crash it, there's going to be... I know that the FAA is going to be here, the NTSB, a lawyer, so I have to know. Any other questions? I have one more. Darren. Well, let me get to... I'll keep my question. No. I sit behind the desk.
More of a comment. You were asking about how do we get that hangar flying back into our training. The UAV discussion is kind of funny. I was at the Louisville-Miami game last week, not very happy, but there was a UAV flying around with Miami colors that should have stayed on the ground because our football stayed on the ground all throughout the game as well. But I was concerned because here is the UAV flying around the end zone at the Cardinal Stadium, and I can't do that in a 150. So I was wondering quite carefully, and I used to run UAVs in the Army, and I knew we had a problem there. So I'm curious what's going to come out of that. It's a big concern, but we do have some venues for that. I'm in the MBAA Safety Committee, and last year at the convention we came up with our top 10 safety priorities. One of them is training. We do have a training subcommittee that is addressing exactly the topic of discussion that you brought up. And it's a great venue, and I highly encourage you to look it up. Go to the website. There's a pull-down tab for the safety committee. I'll give you my card afterwards. And what we need is points of view and participation, just like what you're providing us here, so we can get people on that. We address those questions to the training providers. during the last year's base, we had several of the training providers participated in our subcommittee meetings, and these topics of discussion are brought up. And that's one of the best venues out there. And we monitor and run a message board that exchanges all the best practices and the questions. Some of the stuff on the airmail system is out of control, but we do a lot of information sharing. So I would encourage you to check out the safety committee. There's several subcommittees. I work on the communications and the flight business jet training aspect of it, and that's a good venue to state those views and get some resources and see what you can do to help out.
Any more? I have one question that I've saved to wrap us up. Okay, so it's the flip of the last question I had about what is the thing that is positively going to change our industry over the next 10 years. What do you see as the biggest risk to our industry over the next 10 years? Take a second.
I think pilot shortage is going to be a huge issue. I was in a meeting a couple weeks ago, and I think Kathy, you may have been in the same meeting with an ex-AOPA guy, and mentioned that the average age of a student pilot today is 44 years old, because when you reach that age, you can finally afford to learn how to fly, and that's a little scary. I think we're going to have I think it's going to be a big issue as time goes on.
While you're all thinking about that, I will say that we're in a hiring mode right now, and I agree. My definition of a pilot shortage, as someone that interviews pilots, is that there's a shortage of pilots that you would want to hire. So a pilot pool is, in my opinion, getting smaller, but then the quality candidates are an even smaller part of that. Sorry, go ahead, Tom. Okay. We did all right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating. It was kind of like Stump the Chumps, I think, that Kent was a part of at MBAA a couple of years ago. I always think of Kent, and I always think Stump the Chumps. I don't know why those two things go together. Thank you for being a good sport about things, Kent. Everybody else, thank you, guys, for being here. We very much appreciate it. A couple of the other presenters had to leave to go off and work at the FSDO, for example. Thank you, guys, for showing up and being part of this and taking time out of your busy lives to be part of this. We are committed at Reynolds Jet to be part of this as an ongoing thing throughout the year, and we are looking forward to CBAS 2015. So once again, I know I'm a broken record, but please, please, please give us feedback. Be as Mercer said to a couple of folks today, be brutal with us. I've already squirreled away a couple of things that I would change for next year. I also have squirreled away, already started planning for next year a couple of days ago. I have a couple of presenters in mind, and so we're planning for 2015. So please give us that feedback. So a couple of